Why economists don't care about the debt. Debt is frequently depicted as a financial adversary, particularly in political discourse and the media. Numerous politicians and individuals have issued warnings regarding an imminent economic catastrophe, citing the escalating national debt as an indicator of fiscal irresponsibility that will eventually return to haunt us. Debt is a source of apprehension for the average citizen, as it accumulates obligations without a clear method of repayment. Nevertheless, economists frequently assume a more nuanced, if not more lenient, perspective on national debt. The question of why a significant number of economists do not appear to be as concerned about national debt as the general public is raised by this dichotomy between public perception and academic thought. To thoroughly investigate this inquiry, it is necessary to first comprehend the meaning of debt within the context of a nation, the distinctions between it and personal debt, and the reasons why economists assess it differently than the average person. This article will examine the debt-to-GDP ratio, inflation, monetary policy, economic development, and debt sustainability, all of which are essential components of comprehending the genuine effects of national debt on an economy. Number 1. Personal debt versus national debt. One of the primary reasons why economists are less concerned about national debt is that it is essentially different from personal or household debt. Individuals are subject to a finite liability, debt. You are required to repay the money you borrow from a lender over a specified period, typically with interest. Failure to repay may result in legal repercussions, including bankruptcy. A distinct paradigm is employed by nations, particularly those that issue their currency. The United States, Japan, and the United Kingdom borrow money by issuing government bonds. These bonds serve as an assurance that the principal will be repaid with interest at a later date. This comprehension is the reason economists do not compare household debt to national debt. A nation, particularly one with a large, diversified economy, has a plethora of resources at its disposal to manage and service debt, such as taxation, borrowing, and money creation. Number 2. The debt-to-GDP ratio. Although the sheer magnitude of national debt in the trillions of dollars is frequently the focus of headlines, economists evaluate debt over other assets. The debt-to-GDP ratio is the most frequently employed metric, which contrasts the size of a country's economy to its total debt. At first, a high national debt figure may be alarming. However, it becomes more manageable when the country's economy is large and expanding. The debt-to-GDP ratio is a critical metric that informs economists about the extent to which a nation can realistically service its debt. The government can increase its revenue through taxes and repay or roll over its debt without significant issues if an economy grows at a healthy rate. Nevertheless, the burden of debt servicing can increase, potentially resulting in fiscal crisis if the economy stagnates or contracts. Number 3. The use of debt as a growth instrument. Another reason why economists do not panic about the national debt is that debt can stimulate economic development when utilized effectively. To finance infrastructure initiatives, research and development, education, healthcare, and other essential services that stimulate long-term economic growth, governments borrow money. These investments not only enhance the quality of life for citizens, but also enhance the productivity of the economy. For instance, to stimulate demand during economic downturns such as the Great Depression or the 2008 financial crisis, governments assume substantial debt. This Keynesian approach, which is named after economist John Maynard Keynes, proposes that the government should increase expenditure, even if it means borrowing, to stimulate the economy during periods of recession. The government will be able to more effectively manage the debt and reduce expenditure once the economy has recovered. This perspective is frequently advocated by economists due to the potential for protracted economic hardship, increased unemployment, and diminished potential output in the event of a recession. Governments can prevent the economy from spiraling into a deeper recession or depression by borrowing during difficult times. Additionally, the relative burden of debt can be progressively reduced as the economy grows. Number 4. Interest rates and inflation. Even though economists are less concerned with the magnitude of the national debt, they acknowledge that debt has tangible repercussions, particularly in terms of inflation and interest rates. Inflation can result when a government borrows disproportionately, particularly in a full employment economy. The economy's capacity to produce products and services is outpaced by the growth of the money supply, which creates inflation. Nevertheless, inflation can be controlled through monetary policy in sophisticated countries that have independent central banks. To alleviate inflationary pressures and calm an overheating economy, the central bank may increase interest rates. Therefore, economists contend that inflation is not an inevitable consequence of excessive borrowing, but rather a risk that can be mitigated. Furthermore, the cost of debt servicing becomes a concern when interest rates increase. If a government is required to pay a higher interest rate on its bonds, it may be compelled to allocate a greater portion of its budget to debt repayments, which could potentially impede the allocation of funds to other critical expenditures. This is especially alarming if the country's economy is not expanding at a rate that is sufficient to cover the increasing debt costs. Nevertheless, the cost of debt servicing remains relatively low in a low-interest rate environment, which has been a feature of many developed countries over the past decade. Number 5. The function of central banks. One of the reasons economists are less concerned about national debt is that central banks have a greater number of instruments at their disposal than they did in the past. Quantitative easing (QE) is a method by which central banks, including the Federal Reserve in the United States, can acquire government debt. Central banks infuse liquidity into the economy and reduce long-term interest rates by purchasing government bonds. During the 2008 financial crisis and the COVID-19 pandemic, quantitative easing was a significant policy instrument. By purchasing trillions of dollars in government bonds, the Federal Reserve assisted in the stabilization of financial markets, the reduction of interest rates, and the promotion of economic recovery, all while managing the federal debt burden. Critics contend that quantitative easing (QE) can result in inflation or asset crisis. However, inflation has remained relatively low in the majority of advanced economies that have implemented QE. Economists are less concerned with the immediate consequences of debt when the central bank can intervene to regulate liquidity and interest rates within the financial system. Number 6. Sovereign debt as a secure asset. Specifically, economists are not excessively concerned with the national debt in developed countries, such as the United States, due to the global perception of sovereign debt as a safe asset. This is one of the most underappreciated reasons. For instance, U.S. Treasury bonds are regarded as one of the most secure investments in the world. During periods of uncertainty, investors, both domestic and foreign, pursue U.S. Treasuries, thereby ensuring a consistent demand for government debt. Countries that have a history of repaying their debt, a strong rule of law, and a stable political environment can borrow at relatively low interest rates because lenders believe the risk of default is low. Number 7. The myth of national bankruptcy. The dread of national bankruptcy. The notion that a nation can default on its obligations and run out of money, similar to a household or business, is one of the most prevalent myths regarding national debt. Nevertheless, this apprehension is largely unfounded in countries that issue their currency, such as the United States, Japan, and the United Kingdom. These countries can generate additional currency to satisfy their obligations. Although inflation may result from this, it is not equivalent to bankruptcy. Countries that borrow in foreign currency, such as numerous emerging markets, are at a higher risk of default if they are unable to generate an adequate amount of foreign currency to pay off their debts. However, default is exceedingly unlikely for nations that manage their currency. Conclusion. Finally, economists are not concerned with national debt for a variety of reasons. Sovereign debt operates under distinct regulations from domestic debt. Countries can manage inflation and interest rates by issuing currency, rolling over their debt, and employing monetary policy. Debt can be a potent instrument for enhancing living standards and promoting economic growth when employed prudently. Additionally, the debt-to-GDP ratio is a more pertinent indicator of a nation's capacity to fulfill its obligations, and numerous advanced economies possess the institutional capacity to borrow at low rates for protracted periods. That's all for today. If you found this helpful, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and check out these videos for more great content.